I honestly cannot believe the timing of this video. If you're an active member of my Discord server, then you already know that there was supposed to be a video coming out today about Hytoko and one of his victims, going into some really serious stuff about how he manipulated, gaslighted, and publicly lied about this person. But instead of that video, we need to talk about something that literally dropped 15 minutes before I started writing the script. On September 25th, new information was made public proving that SoulDrivenLeft, the so-called former owner of Forsaken, was still being paid 25% of the game's total earnings. This bombshell came right after SoulDrivenLiar, the person who originally pointed out that Soul might still be involved weeks prior, was mocked by Hytoko and attacked in the replies for daring to say it, and now we know that he was right all along. So this video is going to serve as a part 1 of a much larger story. Today, I'll be breaking down everything regarding to SoulDrivenLeft and how he, along with Hitoko, deceived the entire community for months. Tomorrow, I'll be releasing part 2, which will focus on the current owner, Hitoko, and going in much larger allegations surrounding him. And before we get into it, I also want to address the fact that some of the people defending Hitoko have been spreading around blatant lies about me, trying to paint me as some horrible person. That's something I won't be ignoring either and will definitely address in this video. Now before we get into everything, please make sure to like this video, subscribe with notifications on, and share this video with a friend because this situation is genuinely disgusting and these lies need to be called out. Now, most of you should be aware by now of who SoulDrivenLeft is and what they did. But for those who don't, back in May of 2025, SoulDrivenLeft, aka Robotic Developer, was exposed for disturbing behavior, including financially supporting a attempted using Forsaken funds, distributing illegal material, blackmailing victims, and platforming within his team. One victim was even on May 26, 2025, Soul acknowledged the allegations were true and supposedly stepped down, with the Forsaken Discord server announcing that Hitoko and Basil were now owners. He was banned from the server, but the very next day, it was revealed that instead of finishing the transfer, Soul had illegally sold the game to a reseller. This sparked a lot of confusion, and Hitoko reassured everyone that legal documents proved that he and Basil were still in control, but Creecraft warned them that Forsaken was a multi-million-dollar IP, and without that proper paperwork, Soul could still claim ownership. Meanwhile, Soul deleted tweets, dodged accountability, and in private DMs, he spent hours nitpicking semantics, admitted to defending QXOW, and even confessed on his locked Twitter account to leaking a 16-year-old's. His leaked defense document only made things worse. It excused people like Fungus, who was attempted, and defended like Stoppy Blue, downplayed catfishing justified sharing material by blaming his age, and was even filled with sarcasm, rants, and random nonsense. Leaked messages also showed how Soul admitted to never changing, called himself a monster, and admitted to betraying the Forsaken team out of pettiness. He was even accused of stealing up to $2 million from Forsaken-related projects, including charity funds. The most recent thing we've heard about him was that he was trying to start a new game under a completely different identity, aside from, making multiple Roblox accounts and getting caught every single time. And as of right now, September 25th, the biggest bombshell dropped. Despite Hitoko claiming that SoulDrivenLeft was gone and had no association with Forsaken anymore, Soul was still being paid 25% of Forsaken's earnings, proving that he and Hitoko deceived the entire community for months. Before we get into what happened today, we need to start with a Google document that came out about 2 weeks ago. That document was made by SoulDrivenLiar, and if you yet don't know who that is by now, SoulDrivenLiar is a person who originally exposed SoulDrivenLeft back in May. Unfortunately, at the time that this document was released, a lot of people brushed it off as speculation. In fact, instead of anyone taking him seriously, people just kept on comparing it to the Japanese soldier that was fighting 29 years after the war ended. But looking back at it now, a lot of what he said was actually true. That document laid out proof and reasoning for why SoulDrivenLeft never really left Forsaken. The document said that Soul was still tied into an active deal with Hockey Mercy, Hitoko, and Das Period. First, it went over Hockey Mercy's connection. She used to co-own Forsaken and was Soul's partner. The document also claimed that she was still working with him behind the scenes, helping him re-enter Roblox through her accounts and even defending him in conversations with victims. Her involvement also tied back to Forsaken's ownership shuffle back in May. According to the document, when Soul supposedly stepped down, he and Ava secretly tried to sell the game with Period as a middleman. That deal later collapsed, but with Marcy's help, it was reworked. The document's conclusion was that the handover to Hitoko and Basil might have been nothing more than a publicity stunt. However, it's important to clarify here that the claim that Hitoko and Basil weren't really owners is still just a speculation and has never been confirmed. The document also suggested that Hitoko and Basil may have been under a non-disparagement clause, which would explain why they were oddly positive about Soul after everything came out. Finally, the document pointed to evidence of Soul using alt accounts to stay tied to Forsaken. The account vinyl_1337, which was actually created right around the time of Forsaken's deal, along with the group holder Undead Nation is Fun, were linked back to Soul and Marcy, and even connected to trades involving Das Period. The conclusion was blunt. Soul and Period were still working together behind the scenes, using cover accounts to keep him tied to the project. When this document dropped, Hitoko immediately responded on Twitter, addressing nearly every point. He called parts of it educated guesses, denied being bound by an NDC to talk Soul, claims he never invited Marcy to RDC, and even showed a snippet of a supposed contract that transferred ownership to him. He repeatedly told people that Soul was gone and insisted that the team had no ties to him anymore. But here's the thing, while some parts of the document, like the Marcy situation and the Basil/Hitoko ownership theory, remain unconfirmed speculation, other parts have now been 100% proven true. The prediction that Soul was financially still tied to Forsaken has been confirmed, with the evidence that dropped today showing that he was still paid 25% of the game's revenue. That means the same community that mocked and attacked SoulDrivenLeft for raising these concerns now have to face the fact that he was right all along, or at the very least, partially right. And that brings us to what happened today, September 25th, the moment that proved SoulDrivenLeft's document wasn't just speculation. At 12:32 p.m., an account called Forsaken Burner dropped a tweet with a screenshot from the Forsaken group's payout percentages, and right there, it showed SoulDrivenLeft still receiving 25% of the game's total revenue. Now, just for some context, if you missed it, earlier in SoulDrivenLeft's document, we already clarified that vinyl_1337, or otherwise known as Vincent, was Soul's alt. This wasn't just a theory anymore, this was hard proof that Soul was still financially tied to Forsaken despite months of reassurance from Hytoko that he was completely gone. The tweet called it out directly. Then why is Soul still receiving a majority of Forsaken's revenue? Why is Period receiving the second majority of it? Why have you lied about Soul not being involved with Forsaken for months to your audience when it's obvious that they still are? And instead of addressing the evidence, Hitoko reportedly ran to the private developer lead server to look for someone to blame for the leak and brainstorm ways to cover it up. As Forsaken Burner put it, instead of properly addressing this, Hitoko has resorted to running to the private dev lead server to find someone to blame for this getting out and proposing ideas about how they could lie their way out of it. Pathetic. This was the bombshell moment. The prediction that Soul was still secretly involved, the exact thing SoulDrivenLeft has been harassed for saying, was now confirmed beyond any doubt. Soul was gone in name only, while still profiting from the game the whole time. Not long after the burner tweets dropped, Hitoko finally responded publicly. He posted a long thread on Twitter trying to contain the damage, but instead it raised even more questions. He started by flat out denying Soul's involvement, writing, "I'm going to reiterate, Soul is not involved in Forsaken's development or anything like that. Not only would their continued involvement not only damage the game, the team, and its reputation, but it would also ruin the livelihoods of many people involved." From there, he doubled down, insisting that he and Basil were the legal owners of Forsaken and its IP. He also claimed there were no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and even referenced the makeshift deal as proof of their control. But at the same time, he admitted that the NDA prevented him from sharing details about the arrangement, something that immediately made people skeptical. If everything was so straightforward, why couldn't the team be transparent until they were exposed? He also argued that Soul and Ava had been removed since late May and were not allowed to come back, yet in that same thread he admitted that in order to fully remove them, the team had been pulled and wrapped around a finger to do what we could to get it out of their hands. That wording only fueled suspicion because it sounded like Soul still had leverage all the way up until recently. Finally, Hytoko shifted the focus to the leak itself, saying that the team believed they knew who exposed the payout logs and that they would be trying to take action. He ended the thread by saying the reason they never addressed this earlier was because people would have twisted it as continuing to associate with Soul. Which, I mean, if we're looking at this from a realistic standpoint, that's exactly what happened. I mean, first, he deflects the blame instead of addressing the payouts, and he focuses on the leaks itself, saying that the team knows who did it and will take action. From my standpoint, that's a classic dodge by attacking the leader and not the evidence. Second, he appeals to sympathy, claiming that exposing Soul could ruin livelihoods of the other developers. That shifts the criticism from leadership to innocent developers when the real issue is hiding Soul's profits. Third, he contradicts himself, saying Soul was gone since May, but also admits that they pulled and wrapped things around a finger. Both can't be true. It's deliberate confusion. Fourth, he hides behind the NDA, saying he can't go into details, which isn't transparency at all. It's an excuse to avoid showing any evidence. And finally, he blames the community by saying that they twist it. That's just shifting responsibility instead of admitting that they chose secrecy. So if you look at this thread as a whole, it wasn't about accountability, it was about damage control. Hitoko painted the leader as the enemy, the community as the problem, and Forsaken as the victim, all while dodging the one fact that mattered. Soul was still cashing out 25% of the game's revenue, and Hitoko openly lied to everyone, including the victims of Soul, for months on end. Now I want to stop here for a second because even Creekcraft weighed in on the situation, and I honestly think his take completely misses what really matters here.
So the first thing that you're going to do before entering into any negotiations is everyone's going to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, which basically means you can't talk about any of the details of the negotiation, of the deal, of the contract, whatever. You can't talk about any of that publicly. If you do, you're in violation of the NDA, which, I mean, the fact is legally, they were probably not allowed to tell anyone publicly. If they did, they could get, they could get sued or I don't know the specifics of the deal, right? But you can't break an NDA. That's bad. Soul, for all intents and purposes, owned the game, right? They wanted to sell the game. They sold the game. They get a percentage of it. That's just kind of how, not to be like blunt or disrespectful, that's just kind of how real life works. In the eyes of the law, legally, Soul has not been charged or convicted with anything. They have not been, sent to jail. They've not been to court over anything. Nothing has been brought up against them legally that I'm aware of. And so this is just kind of the situation that the game is in. Soul is going to earn a percentage of the game.
Creek argued that the reason Hitoko and Basil didn't disclose Soul's continued profits was because of NDAs. He said that in any multi-million-dollar IP sale, everyone signs a non-disclosure agreement, and if Hitoko broke that, he could be sued. He also said that it's normal for former owners to keep getting a percentage of the revenue after selling the game, and that since Soul hasn't been legally charged with anything, that there's technically nothing stopping him from collecting that share. And a lot of people have latched onto that argument. They couldn't say anything because of the NDA, but here's the problem. The NDA isn't a license to lie. If you're legally restricted from saying something, then don't say anything. But Hitoko, he didn't stay silent. He told the community again and again that Soul was completely gone and had zero involvement in Forsaken, when in reality, Soul was still pocketing 25% of the game's revenue. That's deception, at its best, actually. And the NDA excuse falls apart even further when you consider that there was a clear workaround. Forsaken's team, or even a third-party company, could have bought out Soul's 25% stake. That's how these situations are usually handled when someone is too toxic to remain attached to a project. You negotiate a one-time buyout, pay them off, and cut ties completely. That way, the new owners keep full control and the community can trust the person in question is actually gone. But that never happened here. Instead, Soul's cut was left in place, ensuring he continued profiting off of Forsaken every single month, and the only reason we found that out is because of a leaked payout log. So, Creekcraft is technically right, NDAs exist and the revenue splits are common, but framing this as just a how business works situation ignores the reality of the situation. This isn't just business, this is about ethics and accountability. I'm not talking about some random ex-owner cashing out. We're talking about a person with a history of behavior who was supposed to be completely removed and instead was secretly allowed to profit from the game for months. And if Hitoko's first thread wasn't enough, he went on to make an even longer post that reads more like a personal diary than a response to a community, and once again it's full of manipulation. First, he shifts the focus away from accountability by centering everything on his own struggles, his stress, his weight gain, his toxic relationship, his doxing, his private life, and now don't get me wrong, harassment and doxing are never okay, but bringing all this up in the middle of being exposed isn't about transparency. It's about drowning the audience in sympathy so they forget the actual issue. Soul was still being paid a quarter of Forsaken's revenue. Hitoko lied to everyone, including victims of Soul's manipulation, harassment, and about everything. He uses guilt-tripping and emotional appeals by framing Forsaken as both the best and worst thing that ever happened to him, listing how it let him quit his job, go to college, and meet new people. That makes it sound like criticism of his leadership is an attack on his personal growth, when, in reality, the criticism is about his dishonesty with the community. Then, he shifts blame onto others, like for example SoulDrivenLeft, his ex, and even me personally. He paints himself as the victim of a smear campaign, rather than the person who got caught hiding Soul's continued profits, and by pointing fingers, he avoids taking any direct responsibility for what happened. And just so it's clear, I'll be speaking more about the situation with Hitoko's ex in my next video, because that deserves a full breakdown on its own. He also mixes truth with distractions, like for example, he admits to parts of his past, but immediately follows it with attacks on his ex, claims about leaked addresses, and long shoutouts to his family, friends, and teammates. This tactic buries the important details in walls of text, so anyone trying to keep up feels overwhelmed. Finally, he closes off with his loyalty, signaling, by name-dropping a dozen developers and insists he fought both tooth and nail for the team. It's an appeal to authority. Look at how many people started with me, so I must be in the right. But loyalty lists don't erase the fact that Soul was still secretly profiting while Hitoko told everyone otherwise. So when you put it all together, these posts aren't about setting the record straight. They're about controlling the story, distracting everyone from all the evidence, and shifting the spotlight off of Soul's payouts. It's manipulation, plain and simple. Finally, after everything blew up, Hitoko posted what he called a more proper and thought-out thread. But even here, the same manipulation tactics keep showing up. First, he leans harder than ever on the NDA excuse by saying over and over again that he couldn't disclose Soul's continued profits because of legal contracts. I get that, but the NDA doesn't force you to lie. If he truly couldn't say anything, then he should have stayed silent. Instead, he actively reassured the community for months that Soul was completely gone, while privately letting him take 25% of the revenue. That's not being silenced by the NDA. That's him lying to everyone, and that's something that I've seen a lot of people on Twitter not comprehend. I, along with everyone else who currently doesn't like Hitoko, are aware that he was forced to do this under a contract in the NDA. We get it. But I feel what me, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this, the rest of the community are pissed at Hitoko because he actively lied to victims and the whole viewer base, the whole games, the player base. He lied to everyone for months. Then, he also reframes the whole situation as a necessary evil by claiming Forsaken couldn't just be handed over and that letting Soul keep a stake was the only way to secure the game. This paints Hitoko as someone who saved Forsaken, when in reality what he did was allow a known to keep profiting from it. And let's be clear, there were other options. Soul's 25% stake could have easily been bought out by another group or company entirely. That's how situations like this are usually handled when someone is too toxic to stay tied to a project, but again, as I mentioned earlier, Hitoko didn't do that. He left Soul tied directly to Forsaken. Third, he appeals to sympathy again by talking about how this news is going to get him ostracized, how hard the legal process has been, and even says if you're going to hate anyone, hate me, not Basil or the rest of the team. That's loyalty bait. It's designed to make feel bad for him for criticizing him while shielding Basil and the rest of the team from scrutiny. I think it's the only respectable thing about him in this situation. Nothing else. He also leans into moral relativism by admitting that he understands the moral perspective, but then immediately dismisses it by saying he couldn't sacrifice the project because of one person. This downplays Soul's actions as if they were just a minor inconvenience, instead of the reason so many people left Forsaken in the first place. And lastly, he tries to close the book on the story by reiterating that Soul is not involved in the development process, which is a half-truth at best. Nobody's accusing Soul of actively coding for the game. The issue is that he was still being paid for it after everyone was told he wasn't. So when you really break everything down, none of his responses resolve anything. It's just a cleaner version of the same tactics that he used in earlier responses. Hide behind the NDA, downplay the ethics, play the victim, and try to shift all the blame onto legal complications. But the reality is simple. Soul was still profiting off of Forsaken, and Hytoko lied about it until he got caught. Now, as a result of me calling all of this out on Twitter, constantly being in fights on Twitter all day, trust me, it wasn't a good day on Twitter today, a lot of people began falsely accusing me of being a PDF file. This is a disgusting claim, a claim that has been hanging around me since I was 16 years old. This was debunked numerous times by FBI agents, by the original accusers, by literally everyone. I have made 3 or 4 videos on the situation already. I have made numerous stages speaking about it and debunking everything on stages. There is nothing more I could do to fight off this stupid allegation that has been debunked so many times. I will do one more video about it. I will have it pinned. I will have the whole video be about that specific situation. I don't know when it's going to come out. There's a lot of situations that need to be covered. Probably will be dropped within the next week or 2. I am genuinely disgusted that people are using this false, outrageous claim against me just to get an upper hand with this whole situation. I don't want to make this video any longer than necessary, so I'll just leave off this segment right here. If you currently have any questions about that situation, 1, you could either contact me on Discord, or 2, if you want to save us both a little time, what you could do is you could go to the 3 or 4 videos, I think there's 3 videos right now that are up, which actually go into full depth about the situation. The first video was a 2-hour-long video that was posted 2 years ago when the situation originally happened. Video and the timestamp are currently on screen. If you want a more updated version, which actually went a little bit into something that happened earlier this year, you could go to one of the 2 videos that are currently on screen right now. Okay, now that that's out of the way, there's one last thing I need to do before I close out the video. I've seen people going around claiming that Soul broke the NDA and that he must have been the one who leaked the payout logs, showing that he still earns 25% of Forsaken's revenue. If we're being completely honest, that makes absolutely no sense. Why would Soul sabotage his own deal? The very deal that's keeping him financially afloat. There is zero evidence suggesting that it was Soul who leaked that information. It's just people, the same people who are lying about me, pulling random theories out of their to distract from what's actually happening. The real issue here isn't who leaked the logs. The real issue is that Hitoko let Soul keep a massive share of the game's profits and then lied to an entire community about it, and especially Soul's own victims. There is full undeniable proof of this. That is a fact that we can prove. So please do not get caught in random rumors that are going around out there. Stick to the evidence that has been already made public. Soul never left, and the Forsaken team hid that from everyone until they got caught. Thank you for watching this video. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with a friend, because tomorrow, or after tomorrow, I'll be dropping a part 2 where I go in depth on Hitoko's ex and the disturbing allegations surrounding that situation. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.